Good morning, everyone. My name is McCall Floriani. I'm so happy to be with you again in our continued webinar series for the Return to Work program. Very excited about the discussion today. As we've been going through the series of webinars, we've been kind of going in altitudes, and this week's webinar is really focused on getting real down to the traction of the topic. And so we've called it the Practitioner's Focus, Key Steps of a Comprehensive Return to Work Program. I'll start with the same slide we start everyone. It's just a reminder that folks today are sharing their opinions and their experiences. They are hardly the professional legal, tax, or medical advice that you should seek on your own professional advisors, and that this is an ongoing topic that's changing. So please share in the obligation to be connected to the CDC and other kind of official sources of information as this topic evolves and the implications of that are upon us. So without further ado, our agenda today, I want to just quickly kind of review how we're going to use the time. We'll start with some announcements and introductions of the panelists we have, and then talk quickly about kind of where those panelists are in their companies and their return to work. So that's the course and speed. And then we'll go through the 5 stages of the Return to Work framework, which is the construct we've used to help kind of size up the problem and the solution for returning to work. And that's just going to be used as a kind of a structural component for us to have the conversations. Then we'll finish with some closing remarks. It's a lot of good content. My role will be to keep us moving through it at a good pace, but I know I'm going to be cutting off discussions that we wish could keep going, but that's just to honor all the topics here and give everyone a complete view of the discussion. Some reminders. So housekeeping, like the other webinars, you're in participant mode, so don't worry about your camera being on or audio. Everyone's kind of been muted and turned off. Welcome to use the question and answer function. It's been wildly popular. We've received hundreds and hundreds of questions. Thank you for your patience as we process them, organize them, try to get the right experts to reply to them and get them back to you. I know many have been responded to, and we continue to take that and feed it into our content, which actually shaped a lot of what today was about as well. So thank you for that. And we will leave some time at the end to actually explicitly hit any questions. We took them from like the top most asked categories and questions. So that'll be part of today's content as well. Kicking off with some announcements. So again, 4 weeks ago, rolled out the Return to Work framework and kind of started talking about the path forward. 2 weeks ago, we announced Sequoia's Return to Work Center, which is our software answer for really helping companies on their path back to the workplace. And today I'm really excited to announce that we're releasing our Sequoia Return to Work Playbook. And it's basically, as you can imagine, a synthesis of a lot of the things that are part of the framework. We have some flows out there that kind of try to organize, the common roles and responsibilities. And acknowledging that, like in a time like this, a lot of people share different roles. So it's just a reference point for people to get to kind of think through and all sorts of other kinds of ways to kind of, get organized. And really, it's hopefully a useful starting point for people going down this journey. There's no shortage of playbooks out there, obviously. And I think I personally find something useful and insightful from all of them. I would encourage everyone to go get a bunch of them. From on the medical and clinical side to the facility side to the kind of healthcare well-being and technology side as well. You can get this on sequoia.com. Don't go now, stay here now, but after you can go there and download it on our Return to Work page. That's pretty easy to find. Another cool announcement, we are announcing that testing through our partnership with One Medical will happen actually in our San Mateo office in the parking lot, starting fully operational by June 3rd. So One Medical actually has facilities, as you know, in the Bay Area. I know we have folks from all over the country listening in today, but a huge group of you are in the Bay Area. So this is actually fills a useful gap for folks, and particularly the Mid-Peninsula or on the East Bay across from the bridge. So come on down. Certainly One Medical subscribers, and anyone who's a Sequoia client can access the One Medical app through our app and make an appointment and get that going. So excited about that. Thank you to our friends at One Medical. Yeah, come on down and get tested. Let's begin. So, center point for this discussion today is what I think we're all trying to figure out, which is, what is our path forward and what are some of the implications, considerations that we should be putting in our plan for a return to the workplace? Or in some cases, a lot of people aren't returning to the workplace anytime soon, but that still leaves a lot of questions and answers that need to be filtered. We do know this, it's going to be complex, it's going to be ongoing, and we also know that everyone we talk to has their people's safety at the center of the discussion, but also trying to balance the realities of running a business. So I'm excited today. I think we have 4 really great voices to help fill in that discussion. From 10X Genomics, we have Allan McCall, who's the VP of Total Rewards, Debra Thompson from Chegg, the Chief People Officer, Julia Goldberg, the SVP of Global Real Estate Facilities and Security, and Sequoia's Chief Administration Officer, Steve Kim. And 4 different companies, we'll get to meet them in a sec, 4 different views as you kind of look at the total rewards, HR, facilities, and the legal perspective. So I think it sets up a very rich conversation for today. Wanted to start just with a little calibration and asking each one of them to talk a little bit about, just briefly about their company and some of the dynamics of their company and where they are in their process and pace to return to the workplace. So Allan, why don't we start with you and we'll work our way down the line. Good morning.
Good morning. Sure. I'm Allan McCall. I'm joining from 10X Genomics. We are a biotech company. We make research tools for folks doing research into a wide range of biological problems, oncology, immunology, and neuroscience. Our products are being actively used in many of the research efforts around COVID-19. And so as a result of that, we haven't had a complete shutdown of our work. We have certainly had all folks that don't need to be on site and in facilities not be on site. And so I'm talking to you from home as the HR, from the HR side of the house, but we've had production operations on site making our products that are being used in the research efforts ongoing throughout this pandemic. And our labs, we've been in the process of opening up. We implemented a testing regime about 4 weeks ago, and we've been growing that. I guess one other, just as additional context, our company's about 700 employees strong. About 450 of those folks are in Pleasanton, California, our HQ, with the remaining 250 folks scattered around the world. And so we do have a global footprint that we're concerned about as well.
Thank you, Allan. Debra, let's turn to you and learn about Chegg. You may be, oh, there you go.
Yep. No, sorry. I thank you very much for having us here. I'm really excited actually to learn from everybody else as well. So I am the Chief People Officer for Chegg. We are an educational technology company. We offer products and platforms for student first learning and support. So we offer homework help, online tutoring, and various programs, all geared towards student first learning. We have about 1,600 people worldwide with offices primarily in Santa Clara and India, and then a couple of other places in the US, but Israel as well. We have been at this now, like everybody else, for a while. We shut down basically overnight and have had nobody in our offices since March 16th, and have actually found out that we're really thriving in a remote environment. So our approach to things it's definitely going to be different than Allan's. because we don't have research facilities or products that we're trying to get out the door that manually need to be made. We're a knowledge-based company and we do everything online, and we found out that we can actually do it remotely. So we're in a little bit of a different headspace than other folks, which is why I think it's really nice to have the whole variety of folks on the phone or on the webinar to learn from.
Cool. Thank you, Debra. Julia.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm excited about this panel. So I work for Buzzfeed, and we are the leading independent digital media company globally. We concentrate on news and entertainment that varies from serious investigative news all the way through to teaching you how to cook during COVID at home with limited resources and everything in between. So we are in 13 cities around the world, and we have an employee base of roughly 1,000 people. And similar to what Debra was just saying, we have gone, we went into an initial work from home globally right around March 19th. So we have been not only having all of our tech teams and our HR and admin and creative teams working from home, but we've been producing all of our content from home. So we have some unique needs there that just through the sheer force of the creativity of our employee base, they've made it work. So we're really proud of that, but we need to also plan for the long term. So that's why I think this conversation is going to be really interesting to hear what everyone's doing.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Steve, why don't we wrap it up on Sequoia?
Okay, great. Well, thanks, McKelly, and thanks for all the fellow panelists and everyone on the Zoom today. So yes, I'm Steve Kim. I'm the Chief Legal and Administrative Officer for Sequoia. I think there are probably a lot of clients here, including the fellow panelists today, but Sequoia is a tech-enabled consulting and services company. So we provide a number of services and technology solutions for our clients. Sequoia has about 400 team members. We have 6 offices, 5 in the US and 1 in India. And I think like a lot of others, we've been sheltering in place since March 19th. And even though Sequoia, I think technically would qualify under the definition of an essential business, we have been working from home ever since. Where we are in the process, we'll continue to stay at home in all locations except Arizona, since we'll follow when state orders are lifted. It's been lifted in Arizona, so we're actively planning for at least a few employees to come back in our temporary office, and that will likely be towards the end of June.
Great. Okay. Thank you, panelists. So this should give you a good understanding of the voices we have and kind of where they are in their journey. Let's dig into the discussion again, kind of based, we'll frame it up against the framework, and starting with creating dynamic policy. So let me set that up real quick. So we've talked about in the past, creating the policy part. Policy was a pretty negative word, I think, by most people's views, with apologies to my legal friend, Steve there. Because it was just kind of like one of those icky things about working at the company. But now it's actually totally changed, right? It becomes a really important piece of documentation to help establish the mutual obligations from both employers and employees. And so, obviously a lot of the traditional resources and experts are out there. The hard part is, of course, that this is an evolving topic, and there isn't a great body of reference material for what we're going through right now in both acuteness and speed. So kind of unpacking that, let's turn it over to the panel. I'd like to, Steve, start with you, since you spearheaded so much of the thinking and policy creation at Sequoia, given obviously your role in the company and in our return to work strategy. So maybe for folks, like what maybe was the, one of the hardest things for you in doing this, and given that there's so much evolution, like what are you looking at? Like what are you paying attention to guide your decision making and how you shape policy?
Yeah, sure. And You know, we talked about this a little bit in our first webinar, which is about a month ago, and I think in the lead up to that webinar over the course of April, if I think about between then and now, there is a world of difference. I think, you know, 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, when we started looking at this, I personally was just setting the state orders on what it would take to lift shelter-in-place orders and trying to derive from that something that employers should do and what we at Sequoia would do. I think now there is a pretty massive body of work out there to draw from, which, you know, in and of itself can cause a lot of confusion. So I look at basically 4 things. From the hygiene and protocol elements that are required, I'm looking at the Cal-OSHA guidance. So as part of the California reopening plan, there are specific industry guides. And California tends to be more explicit and detailed than other states, I think. So that's a good guide for, I think, a lot of companies out there, even outside of California. So there are some very specific and detailed checklist items that Cal-OSHA puts down on things like social distancing in the office, use of face coverings, et cetera. So that's one. I think 2, there are some legal considerations that need to be dialed into policies. So we've relied on a lot of our law firm partners. And those go to some of the thornier questions around privacy and safety, and what are the types of questions that employers can ask. There's some guidance in the EEOC, circulars, and some other source material. So that's probably the second source. And then third, there's just a lot of best practices that can now get dialed in, like what we're adopting at Sequoia. Very small, limited cohorts of employees coming in, so you can sort of manage what's going on in the office. You know, having someone who's dedicated to making sure that the program is operating well, sort of daily symptom checking, so those kind of things. So that's the third, so just best practices. And then finally, there's just some personal choices that can be made, like what is the principle behind who can come in? Should you put in particular entrances and exits that people need to use? So those are kind of the 4 current things for us on what goes into the policy.
Got it. Thank you. Debra, at the center of this, I mean, we've received so many questions that basically boil down to the statement of how are you balancing privacy and safety, right? So kind of like, obviously, there's a lot of changes here, and traditionally the kind of openness and the healthcare information that employee may share with their employer, depending on the scenario, which is needed to keep the environment safe. We'll talk a little bit about communication and education and stuff, but internally in your policy considerations, like how are you navigating that? Who are you getting involved in it? What were some of the things that, you know, stuck out to you as part of that decision making around policy?
Yeah, so we actually, it's funny you should say, because we call it our SWAT team. We actually put together a SWAT team at the very beginning of this. And it consists of myself and our chief legal officer, our chief communications officer, our CFO, and our CEO. And we really have been pulling in experts as we need, whether it's from the facilities and security side of things or benefits or whatever. And we've tried to, as much as we can, make decisions as a group. And really, like you said at the beginning, the heart and soul of this is our employees and their families, and trying to make sure that they are safe and healthy, and we are ready at the right time for people to come back. So we've started policies again, like I said, we went out to remote work overnight and started immediately trying to plan on how we get back into the office, not knowing how remote work was going to work for us. So we immediately started talking about, okay, how can we reconfigure the office? How can we put in place, if we need to, testing? We haven't gotten, one of the things that we haven't done yet is decided whether we're going to do mandatory testing, because what we found out is what I said at the beginning, is that we're doing amazingly well at working from home. So we were able to put the brakes a little bit on things and say, okay, now instead of rushing towards this, we're going to step back and we're going to really learn from what everybody else is doing, because people are going to go back before we are. and to really figure out the best way to make this work for Chegg, because what works for Julia at Buzzfeed may not work for us at Chegg, and vice versa, right? So we do have this SWAT team, and we are looking at everything that that Steve said as well, best practices, talking to people. I mean, I can't tell you how much networking and actually talking to folks like Julia or Allan or you guys at Sequoia has helped us inform what it is that we're going to do as we get further into the summer and start to think about opening up offices. Yeah. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to do my duty here to advance us. About 100 more questions I want on this topic, but let's talk about testing here, because this is a hot topic for a lot of people, and this is very now in terms of what people are going through. So, we define this category, of course, the testing part, but also the full well-being and ongoing care. A lot has changed, as Debra was just talking about, like the way where people are going to work and how they work and how they need to access support has changed pretty dramatically. Some say it's really just a catalyst to the future of work, but it is something that now companies need to adjust. Let's kind of start with the testing, because there's still a lot of options. It's moving quickly. There's, ongoing innovation, as Allan just pointed out, going on about trying to get to the right solutions. Allan, I actually want to start with you, because you have a kind of a hyper scenario about testing and its importance in just, keeping the innovation and the R&D and all that important stuff going. Let's talk about just like what were some of the considerations, some things you learned as you looked at setting up testing for your folks, and maybe just share with what you are in fact doing for testing.
Sure, yeah. We have implemented a testing screening program for all of our employees who are required to be on site. So we've started and been building this from our production operations, which have been on site the entire time, to some of our lab support and R&D functions that are just coming back online. And we benefit from having a team of scientists who not only do we have access to what the materials out there, but we have a team of scientists who understand the what's going on deeply and have really strong opinions about what makes sense and how these things work. What we looked at a lot of different alternatives, and we ended up implementing a weekly test screening for any employee to be on site. And so we screen the employees toward the end of a week in order to clear them to come into the facility in the following week. We were forced, there isn't a lot out there in terms of blueprints for preventative testing. We were forced to look really carefully at what it is that we're wanting to do. So clearly we're trying to mitigate risk, just like if you're screening with temperature, which we also do, and the screening questions, you're trying to mitigate risk to your employees. With testing and the current testing, the available testing, which is the nasopharyngeal swab, which is not comfortable for the recipients, not something that somebody wants to do every day. And so we looked at that. We looked at what is known about the development, the progression of the disease and viral loads. We decided and have settled on, at least at the moment, a weekly testing protocol. And so we have people come through once a week. We've been building that up over the last 4 weeks. We've completed 4 weeks of that, and we're starting on week 5. So it's been successful so far, although I think that everybody would like to find a better alternative to that is less, although this is technically non-invasive, that's a little bit less uncomfortable. But at the moment, that's the process that we've set up. And then we continue to look. This is only for our folks that are in our Pleasanton headquarters. For our employees that are around the world, we're thinking forward to when labs start to open up to folks in general. And we have field scientists that go out and help researchers in their labs in the ordinary course. They've obviously stopped traveling and doing that sort of work now, but at some point we're going to need to re-engage, and scientists will need that support and help in whatever research that they're doing, and how do we protect them that's a next level problem that we've just started to think
Yeah.
about.
Do you have any folks who just said, I don't want to get tested, and how are you handling that? Because I know that's a question a lot of people are anticipating, like there's going to be some folks that, I mean, yeah.
So we've definitely had folks say that they would rather not do it. We are requiring it, we're going to require that you have had the test in order to be on site. And for folks that don't want to, can't, if there's a medical indication, that's clearly an issue as well. Our first step is to understand, collect as much information as we can, and figure out what we can do, and how to make it work. And, you know, at the end of the day, obviously we care about the individual, and if it's causing a severe problem to them, that's something that we'll need to sort out. But it's also about protecting the entire population of folks that are there. And so at the moment, we don't want to take that risk that, you know, we'll have gaps in the program for the protection and safety of the employees at large.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Allan. Julia, you have a pretty complex kind of more global scenario. Like what have you learned about global, like testing on a global scale, let's say, and what are some of the considerations or things that you applied?
Sure. So to back up just a little bit, I want to echo some of the processes that we're doing that sort of combine what my peers have said here, which is we have some very core guiding principles that we have published out to the company globally. As Debra was saying, just communication is super key. And those are safety, caution, and culture. So everything we do, including the testing protocols and what we're requiring, have to fall within those guiding principles, and we're always looking back at those. So obviously with safety, just ensuring safety for ourselves, our communities, our families, and our office space. And I sort of shrug when I put that last note. We don't want people to think that all we're thinking about is how do I get you back to work. It's really about the emotion and the culture, and keeping people safe. They're our most prized asset. So that's really important to us. And then in terms of caution, obviously just taking measured and deliberate steps. And so testing falls within that. We are going to use government orders as our baseline for soft opening, semi-opening, or fully opening offices. We're also going to use local government orders in regards to availability and testing, as well as rely on our healthcare peers to be able to provide that testing, whether it is government related, like the NHS in the UK, or private healthcare here in the US. And so we are not requiring testing at the moment, but we are requiring a certain list of questions to be answered before you can come on site. And if you can answer, let's say, yes to any of them, they're the usual sort of 4 to 5 questions that you expect, including, I have taken my temperature and it is not above X, right? So we're thinking of 100.4 because some people run warm, and just everyone will know their baseline. But if you can answer yes to any of those questions, you are not allowed in one of our offices based on government orders allowing us to have you in the office. So we've had our essential staff in our big anchors of LA and New York. We have not required testing for them. They just have to rep each day to those 4 to 5 questions. We're not storing any of the responses if we're talking about privacy and data.
Sure.
However, if someone does respond, yes, they have to self-identify to their HR business partner. So I've hopefully answered your question in a roundabout way.
That's great. No, that's wonderful.
But we're just a different type of facility. And so for Allan, clearly your teams are dealing with, handling medical cultures and all that kind of stuff. And so it's a little different. And so we're, just to repeat myself, we're not requiring testing.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So let me advance so we keep going. So getting to the stage where you've got your policies and your testing and your environment ready, it's time to open the doors, green light, and start letting in folks. I've said this in the past, like the word cohort is not a word I think I've used in over a decade, and I've used it about 1 million times in the last 2 months. definitely the mechanism a lot of folks are looking at to help just really have a way to control and respond to letting people in. But this is a big step, and you got folks like Debra and Chegg who've looked at it and said we're not in a rush, and you have folks like Allan who are like we can't afford to close the door. We have to find a means through this period. Let's unpack this part of the process. Steve, I want to start with you. We're right on the doorstep of opening up Arizona. What was the hardest thing about getting ready for you, and how did you solve it?
Yeah, sure. So I don't know, it's funny because I think, trying to build the policy and all the protocols felt hard at the time. And then making sure that we could source all of the in-office equipment we wanted, the basic PPE when stuff was hard to come by was a challenge. But I think at least for me in my role, the thing that was most maybe intimidating was actually just operating day to day. So I think like, the other panelists, we'll have a daily procedure, we'll have a daily self-assessment symptom questionnaire that people need to complete. But the prospect of trying to track all that every day and actually run the policy in a sort of methodical way was something that I found most challenging, right? So I can imagine putting together a spreadsheet or a Google Doc or something and communicating by email or text to get the information from everyone. But then all the privacy concerns, the tracking and making sure it actually works was something that I found more pleasant today. So I think as we talked about in other contexts, that is actually kind of what, that challenge is what led Sequoia to develop some of the tools that we ended up with.
Yeah. Thank you. Allan, it's given that you've been kind of running your you never stopped running the playbook. Maybe how are you doing the day-to-day management? Give us maybe a day in the life of the team who is working on letting people in and out, maybe who's involved and what tools and mechanisms you're using.
Sure. I think that, on the day-to-day, we're still very much in the building mode as it relates to this program. And we're taking it slowly and deliberately and trying to balance our ability to execute and deliver with employees' needs for some level of consistency and comfort in what we're doing. And it's a challenge on a day-to-day basis, but we have a really strong team. It's a cross-functional effort between the business that's running the labs, facilities, HR, legal, and we meet almost daily. We have 3 standing meetings a week to try and stay on top of what's going on. I would advise anybody that's getting involved in this to prioritize that data collection early on, because it can spin out of control quickly. There is no integrated one-stop solution to all of this. And so you've got information coming and going from a lot of different places. As Steve said, some of that is private and some of that is confidential, and it needs to be handled carefully. And so just getting yourself in a position where a month or 2 in, you're not just overwhelmed or unable to execute because of that is, I think, going to be critical. And then trying to look forward and keep our employees apprised of what's coming is our next big priority. How things are changing, how we can make this better for them, how the program may change, timing may change, hopefully testing changes in a way that is better, as we've talked about, and so forth. So those are all issues that we prioritize, and then collecting data on the back end. We're currently asking our employees on a week that are going through this on a weekly basis, how is it going? Try and identify any problem areas that we can address and improve on a week-to-week basis as we move through it.
Cool. I'm just interested, quick round robin. Julie, I'll go to you. Just in your kind of operational mode, where you are in the process, like who's involved and how, what does that setup look like for folks that they could consider?
Thanks. We have a working, I would say, a steering group committee. We're calling it the COVID czars for just internal branding. And that team is made up of legal, HR, IT, office services, facilities, and production studio operations, because that is such a key cornerstone for us to get our production teams back in. So we are meeting, we used to be meeting daily, now it's 3 times a week. We are doing a weekly global all hands from our CEO, who is keeping all the czars are feeding information into him, and he is broadcasting weekly what's happening globally. The biggest sort of thing for us is to, like I said, try to get our production teams back in. So our playbook is that we have created what we're just calling positions. So positions 1 are essential workers and studio productions. Position 2 are non-essential workers, but people that will either benefit greatly by being in the office on a regular basis or semi-regular basis. And position 3 is sort of the same time that we can all go to a movie theater, what happens in our office spaces. But our playbook for the day-to-day is gathering learnings from panels like this. We're quite far ahead, I would say selfishly, in terms of our programming and what our plan is. We have government orders in Australia that are allowing people to go back to work now. And so we are running our playbooks not only based on government orders and sort of what our production needs are, but writing them in such a way that they're generic enough that I could implement them globally, and that it works for all cultures. But I don't think much different than what Allan is saying, and Steve, just constant communication. We've done now, I think, 4 employee surveys about that, and actually activating on those responses and activating and sharing the data. If you're working at yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's great. I got excited because you're actually the perfect segue to our next topic. So I was going to take your hand off. And Debra, I'll take you and let's go to that topic. Educating and communicating, which is obviously the lifeblood of keeping that connection with the employees and keeping the discipline, if you will, intact on what's important as you navigate there. And Steve said in his opening, like the amount of information, thankfully, has increased, 10x, tenfold. But really now it's almost becoming a flood of information and trying to understand what parts you want to synthesize for your folks and put it into the guardrails of your culture and your values and roll it out. Let's start, Debra, I'll start with you on this. I know when we've chatted in the past, like you just exude passion for your people. It's obviously, what makes you great at your role. But what has been effective in terms of engaging, communicating with your folks, given the just simple functional fact that they're all at home now? You can't get them all in a room. Some of the, you've probably leaned on different mediums, but what's worked, what hasn't worked maybe, and what are you guys doing around that? And maybe we can get some other opinions on that as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. We, when this all first started happening, as you can imagine, and not dissimilar to other folks, we had no playbook, we had no nothing. And what ended up happening is that, everybody says over communication is the right thing to do. And what ended up happening is that we really over communicated, where folks were getting way too many messages from way too many people. And so we really had to sit down with the SWAT team and we put a communication map together, right? And said, okay, and figured out, we even narrowed it down to each organization, like HR can send out messages on Tuesdays. And Dan, who's our CEO, he sends out a message every Friday, walking through either what's happening in the business, what's happening in the world, some of the decisions that we're making. So everybody knows on Fridays, he's going to be sending kind of his next summary out, right? So we got very prescriptive with the way that we started to communicate with employees because it just became very overwhelming for everybody. We have done, like Julia was saying, we've done so many surveys and they just keep going and going because we need to, from week to week, not only are things changing in the world, but things are changing in employees' lives as well, right? 1 week their kids are homeschooling, the next week they're off for summer, or You know, so all of these things are very important for us to make sure that we keep an eye on, so that when we put our practices and our programs in place, we're keeping an eye on kind of the employee population to see what it is that they need in order to be successful in this work from home, right? So all of that goes into, I think that there's probably a message that goes out every day regarding certain things. If it's a people message specifically, it comes from me. If it's a program message, it comes from what we've put together as this kind of catch-all one Chegg email that people know when you see this, you're going to see a new program type of thing. So we've spent as much time on communication as we've spent on running the playbooks and trying to figure out what's the right cadence for Chegg to get back into an office. So communication and education has been extremely important to us, and employees are hungry. They are so hungry for information, and it could just be information like we don't know when we're going back yet, but as soon as you tell them something, there's kind of a sigh of relief.
Those are great nuggets in there. Thank you. Julia, you've got, you know, the same kind of global communication challenge. Is there anything different or in addition that has worked for you guys?
I think the challenge is just coordinating what legal parameters there are per country. And so we've partnered pretty intensely with our legal team who have used third-party counsel for their support. But since our culture is pretty universal and the tone of our organization is quite universal, we haven't had any communication challenges, except for the hunger to know more. And if we had a magic ball, we'd use it. It's just the surveying and the constant communication, even if we don't have an update this week, please follow the same course of action. Just that little bit of communication is really important.
Good. Question for all of you. Have you centralized all the kind of COVID related stuff in one place, or is it kind of like where they usually go for other things and there's a COVID component to it? Just interested. Julie, I can start with you since you just...
We have not, because we've not necessarily broadcast any, let's say, paperwork or decks. Not saying that we won't, but the challenge is everything's changing so quickly. You know, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, temperature testing was valid. And now one of the reasons why we're not doing it is because it's not always true. And so for us to start writing documentation and having a repository, it will be constantly changing. So we will get to a point where we will store it and have it available, but we haven't done that yet. Cool.
Let me keep an eye on the clock. I'm going to advance to our fifth and final topic, analyzing and managing, and then we'll get to the questions. So Allan said it, right? That don't underestimate the importance of getting the single source of truth early on. And Steve alluded to the ongoing maintenance of that and how it can actually proliferate out of control. You know, it's a really important thing here because this is something that has a lot of silos, a lot of sources coming together. And, you know, once you're in flight, you really have to have it buttoned up, both from a collection standpoint as well as from a kind of a privacy and sensitivity, depending on the nature of the data you're collecting and who gets to see it. So, you know, a lot to think about there, but obviously those who can do this part of it very well, I think will really succeed and sleep at night, so to speak. Debra, let's go kind of maybe quickly through the group here, but like what are some of the KPIs or things, you know, measurement items that your guys are really focusing on in terms of just like what matters as you prepare?
So some of the things that we're really focusing on right now is we, like many of the technology companies, have an environment that is not conducive to social distancing. So our biggest priorities right now, and we're starting in the Santa Clara office because that's our headquarters, and that will be the first building that we open when we finally do decide to open offices, is trying to reconfigure desks and trying to get automatic opening thing, you know, trying to get construction and contractors in there to redo some of the offices. That's been a challenge because everybody is trying to do the same thing, right? So trying to schedule those. also supply chain issues, right? If we're going to be requiring everybody to wear a mask, then we have to supply masks to everybody, but there are no masks available. So really working through those supply chain issues as well, trying to figure out what it is that we can get on the timeline that we can get it. So those two things really are informing how we're moving forward and how quickly we can go. You know, we're a small fish compared to an Apple or a Google or whatever, and people are going to definitely work towards, you know, contractors in a larger organization versus a smaller one like ours. So we won't be last in line, but we won't be first either. So those are the challenges that we're having with trying just to get people back into the office, is making sure it's safe, or we feel that it's safe enough for people to go back for themselves and their families.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. Allan, going to you, you know, you talked about the kind of SWAT team that comes. What's on the dashboard that you guys are really paying attention to? What are you tracking on a daily basis? Oops, you may be on mute, sorry.
The mute?
There.
Yeah, it depends on the population that you're looking at, but as it relates to the folks that we have on site, clearly our testing protocol has been our highest priority, as well as tracking who's in and through the building and when, trying to keep cohorts together. We have been fortunate, we haven't had any positive tests, but we need to be prepared for the case in which we do, so that we can go back and do whatever mitigation we can through contact tracing and understanding who was where and with whom. Just keeping the operation moving forward, making sure that we're testing the right people, that employees have the right set of information, that we've got the right consents in place to actually be able to execute that is an expanding, and it kind of grows in an exponential way in terms of complexity, pulling this all together. And managing multiple vendors who are helping us to actually execute the problem. So, you know, and the last is, this is hopefully not a permanent state of affairs, and so we're kind of stuck with the question of how much do we invest in building out operations for this. Right now, we've got much of my team, you know, heads down and managing this in a fairly manual way. You know, it's not clear what solutions, you know, like Sequoia's tools or One Medical's tools will actually kind of, where to build those into the process and make that investment versus, you know, hope for some level of change in the environment that will make this less of an issue and muddle through on a more manual basis in the near term. So these are ongoing issues that are tough to answer.
Yeah, of course. Julia, Allan referred to kind of investments in the environment in the workplace, which, you know, is squarely in your corner, in your role. But how are you preparing and kind of setting up the environment to let people in?
So we have the first prong of PPE, and that includes not only physical PPE, but cleaning supplies. So we are fighting the supply chain just like everyone else. And so we're pretty far ahead there. We've got a good grasp and a lot of orders in. We are reconfiguring some of our workspaces to test what it looks like to have social distancing. We have the ability to do that. We're quite, you know, lucky in terms of we have a lot of office space to be able to play around to see what's working for us. So we're prepping that way. And then we're doing all kinds of mock-ups and run-throughs on the production side to understand how many people can we fit on a 1,000 square foot stage. So much testing and prepping and analysis goes into it. We're also looking at all of, we use Envoy for our visitor management and access. We don't expect to have too many visitors coming through, but we're looking to use that as our screening for who's in our buildings.
Point of entry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, very cool.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So let's do this. This will be an experiment here. We'll go through these as fast but as completely as possible. answering some of the top questions. So I'm going to just kind of throw it out, and I'll throw it to you guys. We'll see how many we can get through until we kind of run out of time. So Steve, starting with you. So this is a question we got a lot. What do I do if someone on my team tests positive, right? So what's the play for that?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what we do at Sequoia. So a couple things. First, obviously, their care, their medical care is most important. So at Sequoia, I think a lot of companies have this. They have access to telehealth, when medical or others. So we've been talking to our employees about clicking over and get access to care as quickly as possible. From a system standpoint, I think it's important to remember that companies have systems already for what to do when you're sick. So either put it in ADP or whatever that triggers all the disability and sick leave protocols from there. But then, specifically for COVID, our tools, we will invoke a number of procedures. So we'll notify the fellow members of the cohort. They stay at home until further notice. And then in our policies, we have the typical CDC type requirements, like stay at home for at least 10 days until your symptoms dissipate, and you'll get tested again, and don't come back until you get negative results. That's what we do.
Very cool. Thank you. It's a good little play. All right, Debra, let's do this one for you. How are you identifying and supporting like high-risk employees, right? This kind of came up a little bit earlier, but obviously, folks, and it's a sensitive dance. So have you given this one much thought?
I was thinking about this when I saw the slide. We haven't given this much thought, actually, because we are not identifying folks. And again, I keep harping on this, is the fact that we're not rushing back anytime soon. And even when the office is open, we are not making it mandatory, and it won't be mandatory until at least January, is what we're thinking. So, and it may not ever be mandatory again, right? We might get to the point where there are only a few things that or a few essential people that need to be in the office, but everybody can pretty much work remotely. So we're approaching things much more from a perspective of self-identification, right? If we get to the point where we identify the cohorts and somebody in the cohort says, listen, I am a high-risk employee, our answer to that is going to be, okay, you stay right until you feel like you're comfortable coming into the office.
That's good. Thank you for that frankness. Allan, so how frequently should my employees be tested, right? So everyone is going to have their own answer here, but what did you use to base your answer?
Well, we ended up at a week. I think nobody knows. And then I think in a perfect world, if it was costless and frictionless, you would test people every day before they went in the building, and at least know that their viral load is below the detection level and you've mitigated that risk. We looked at what science was available around how the disease progresses from a non-detectable level to a higher viral load. We also took into account the discomfort that the current tests cause, and settled on a week as a reasonable baseline for mitigating risk to the employees that are working in our laboratories.
Cool. Thanks. It's one of those scenarios where it's good to know a lot of scientists and doctors, isn't it, Allan? Got a little bit of an insight. Yeah, get a little technical on it. Very cool. Julia, so what adjustments are you making to your workspace? So you kind of alluded to some already, and real quick, is there anything unique or like something that surprised you going into it that you're implementing?
I wouldn't say anything surprised me, except for really drilling down to, wow, due to social distancing, this is the amount of people we can have, meaning that it's such a low number that it kicks off so many other things. And we're talking about playbooks. We're now writing a whole other playbook about what to do working from home. What are we going to reimburse? What are we going to cover? All those kinds of things. But just in terms of making adjustments to the workspace that we found unique or new, there's really nothing unique about it. We won't be serving hot, meals, bulk lunches like we used to. I would say that that's not unique to us, but it's something that we're changing.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Good. Thank you. All right, let's see if we squeeze in a couple more. Debra. tackling child care policy support. Are you doing anything unique for that, given people's dynamics at home in a small apartment in San Francisco?
Yeah, very, very early we found out that this was a huge problem. And actually in one of the surveys that we ran, the biggest deterrent to productivity is the fact that folks had to homeschool or watch children, get lunches going, things like that, and continue to work, right? So we very early on put in a reimbursement policy for up to $500 a month for somebody to come in, either somebody who is a spouse that has been furloughed or has lost their job. We will we'll pay for $500.
Oh, cool.
Or if you have somebody who is living in your house or you trust to come into your house, a grandparent or something, then we will do that as well. And then what we're trying to do, especially in the summertime, as the schooling maybe levels off a little bit, is find things for kids to do. So we're going to be running summer coding camps. We're going to be running music camps for kids, and just you name it. We're trying to put something in place where employees have the ability to either have the child sit next to them while they're working, or be independent and do something so that they can get some work done. So those are just some of the things that we're working on.
Super cool. Love the coding camp idea. That's wonderful. Let's weave it back into something that connected to the company. Okay, so how can I? So what? I think we covered this one. I'm gonna keep fishing here. Training. Steve? Is there any requirement for training of managers, or is that just a good best practice?
It's certainly a best practice, but maybe perhaps what people may not realize in California is that fellows are required. As part of the reopening, since offices are now potentially a hazardous work site, you need a work site safety plan for COVID, and you must train. So, yeah.
Got it. Thank you. Any recommendations on public transportation? So Julia and Allan, you sure get people to come to Pleasanton using public transportation. Julia, you have folks in New York and LA where different things happen. Are you doing anything special, or are you asking people not to take public transportation during this period, or are you leaving it to them?
We are currently leaving it to the employees. We're fortunate to be out in the suburbs where parking is less of an issue and traffic is not an issue. And we've yet to have an employee come and tell us that they didn't have an alternative mechanism for our office. So it has not been an issue for us, but I think that we would likely discourage it. But if people have an alternative mechanism to get around a person.
So no policy on your side. Yeah.
Yeah, many of our employees don't have a choice in terms of where they're coming in from. They have to use public transportation. So we are doing two things. One, providing PPE that you get in once. We'll give it to you from the office and you can take it home. And then the second is to have a conversation around, if you're considered an essential worker and are still very concerned, trepidatious about taking public transportation, to make alternate arrangements for you, or still allow you to work from home in your current capacity.
That's great. Thank you. All right, so that's all the time for questions. Thank you finishing this out. We've mentioned the Return to Work Center. If you're interested in that, go to sequoia.com and check it out. It's we shape that piece of software based on conversations like this with so many of you. So it's out there. I skipped over the question about taking care of your people because we actually have a webinar in 2 weeks specifically on that. Which will have more people participating in that discussion, vendors, clients, et cetera. So please tune in. You can register for that on sequoia.com right now. The playbook I mentioned, the testing facility, other things you could bite into. I just wanted to thank our panelists, Julia, Allan, Steve, Debra. Thank you for sharing your experiences. It's a big part of what this journey has been about, and I know in talking to all of you, and you even shared it today, how much it means to you to just be part of a conversation like this and hear from each other. So thank you. I appreciate the courage, the frankness, and the participation in that. It makes it awesome for all of us on this side of that conversation. So
thank you.
We'll continue to do this. Yeah, my pleasure, guys. Thank you. Thank you for being a part of it. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and let's keep that conversation going in 2 weeks, and I'll talk to you soon then. Be well.
Be well.
Bye-bye.
Bye.